All the Young Dudes, Sirius's Perspective by ROLLERCOASTERWORDS. Chapter 9, First Year, Scars. Friday the 15th of October, 1971. For the next few days, Remus Lupin was impossible to pin down. In classes, he ignored all of Sirius's attempts to catch his eye. At dinner, he struck up conversation with Peter, who seemed both flattered and frightened by the attention, to avoid speaking with Sirius. In the common room, if Sirius sat next to him, he would immediately leap out of his chair and make some hurried excuse to rush off. It drove Sirius mad. When he had complained to James about it, the other boy just shrugged neutrally. "Yeah, but he's always running off, that one. Are you sure it's something to do with you?" Sirius very well couldn't explain why he thought Remus was avoiding him, so he gave up whinging about it and turned his attention to planning an ambush. His chance came that very week, during flying lessons. Most of the kids had some experience on a broom, although some had more than others. James was insufferable, darting about, showing off, with fancy loops and sharp turns. Sirius felt a prick of jealousy at the effortless way his friend roamed the sky. Even though he is quite good himself, he wasn't entirely used to being shown up yet. Although the majority of the class could handle the basics, it was another story entirely for the Muggle-born students. None of them had ever flown before, and in their first lesson it had become quite clear that they were enormously uncomfortable on their brooms. Remus was the worst of them all, going pale as he rose into the air and gripping the handle with white knuckles. So it was no surprise that Lupin looked a bit queasy as they changed into their scarlet flying kits and laced their thick boots before squelching out onto the pitch. It had rained the night before, turning the entire field into a muddy, swampy mess. "Right, mount your brooms, please, ladies and gentlemen," Madam Hooch bellowed at the group. "Nice strong wind today, so I want you all to take good care. Potter, no showing off." The last comment made James grin, firing him up. They all clambered onto their brooms. "I'd like five clean laps around the pitch, then a good landing here from each of you. Mind the puddle and remember to use the wind where possible. Use it to your advantage. 5 points to whoever's back first." With that, the gruff witch raised her whistle to her lips and blew hard. James and Sirius started off, zooming ahead of the other students racing around the pitch. "You'll never defeat me, Black," James called dramatically, smiling like his face was going to split in two. "Oi, Potter, no showing off," Sirius shouted back, laughing. Below them, Hooch was booming through her megaphone, telling Remus to fly higher. When Sirius started to glance back, he saw the nervous boy was already falling behind the rest of the class, clutching his broomstick and looking like he was about to be sick. James pulled ahead a bit, crowing triumphantly, and Sirius nudged his broom forward, attention back on the race. The wind whipped through his hair, and for a moment he felt entirely untethered, giddy with freedom. By the end of their first lap, it became clear that James was going to win. He was much better at turning, and pulled ahead with no problem. The two of them grew bored with the race, halfway near the end of the second lap. The rest of the class was just finishing their first, and Potter began showing off, circling the towers of the empty spectator stands and zooming back to complete his laps with time to spare. Sirius cheered him on, flying a few loops on his own broom, but it was clear that it was Potter's show. He tamped down the stubborn resentment that crept in, focusing instead on enjoying the bracing wind against his skin. He completed 4 laps quickly, and watched with James as the other students struggled to keep up. Remus was still plodding along, and Sirius was struck with a sudden flash of inspiration. "Can't avoid me up here, can you?" He slowed down considerably to cruise alongside Remus. Sirius laughed, delighted, and steadied himself. He flew back to Remus and gave him a hard shove backwards. Lupin wobbled some more, but managed to continue his descent. He was doing much better than he had during the last class. He even twisted back to push Sirius again. "Out of my way!" Remus sped up. You can be the last one down for once." "Oh, no you don't." Sirius turned the other boy's tactics around on him, grabbing the tail of his broom and tugging. This was perhaps a bit too effective, as they were both quite close to the ground at this point. Their brooms went flying as they crashed into the huge, muddy puddle, wrestling earnestly. Their robes were instantly soaked. "Black! Lupin!" Madame Hooch marched over, hands on her hips, brow furrowed in a stern frown. Their classmates gathered around, giggling and pointing. Sirius leapt to his feet, pulling Remus roughly up and flicking a bit of muddied hair out of his eyes. What did I say about minding the puddle?" Madame Hooch raised an eyebrow, but the stern look had quickly given way to an amused smirk. There was a twinkle in her eye. "A point each from Gryffindor. You'd better go and wash off in the showers. Off you go." They waddled awkwardly to their Quidditch changing rooms, weighed down by their waterlogged clothes. "Bloody ridiculous kid," Remus grumbled, squeezing some of the water out of his sleeves as he stepped into the squat building. "How are we ever going to dry it?" "The house elves will take care of that," Sirius replied, shaking his off and dumping them unceremoniously in the corner. He heard the wet thwack of Remus's robes hitting the ground behind him as he stepped into the shower cubicle. The water came in a rush of hot steam, unknotting the tension in Sirius's muscles, making him sigh with relief. He was a bit sad about missing 40 more minutes of flying, but he could hardly complain as he relaxed under the hot water. Sirius wrung out his hair and scrubbed the mud from his face, watching it swirl down the drain. He stood under the stream for an extra few minutes, until he heard Remus shut the water off and step out of the next cubicle over. He could hear the other boy plodding around, looking for his uniform. Sirius had brought his own clothes in with him into the stall, bashful about changing in front of his friend. He changed quickly, sweeping his wet hair back from his face and stepping neatly out. Remus was still finishing dressing, fumbling with the buttons of his school shirt. He had done them up wrong, and began undoing them to start over again. Sirius was about to look away when he saw it, the flash of silver discoloration, a jagged stripe that stretched from the left half of Remus's collarbone down diagonally across his chest. For a moment, Sirius's mind was full of his mother's voice, her wand, the sharp flick as she said, "What's that?" He burst out without thinking, pointing. It looked similar, but not quite, not as steady, arching like lightning, fuzzier around the edges. Remus looked up in shock, then back down, hurrying to close his shirt faster. Sirius thought he caught a glimpse of a few other, smaller marks. A scar. Sirius's heart pounded. He felt a bit sick. His head swam. He heard himself saying, "It's different from mine." But no, he couldn't say that. Did it happen to you when you were at the home, where you grew up? He thought of the black eye and the weary look Remus so often wore. Sirius never considered that the other boy might be, well, the same as him. Remus nodded, wordlessly. Sirius felt as if there was something coiling tightly in his chest. He nodded back and said quietly, "I've got scars." Remus was still looking at him, so he bent down, pulling up his trouser leg. He turned his angle quickly to display the marks, before he could think about what he was doing. Remus stared at him, and Sirius watched him staring, trying to decipher the changes that were taking place behind his eyes. He felt very small, suddenly, and dropped his trouser leg. He wasn't sure how much longer he could stand under the weight of those large, unblinking eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They only stared. Sirius's face felt like a mask, stiff and frozen. His heart was still racing, and his mind was full of static. Remus was looking at him, really looking at him, like he was seeing him for the first time. Shall we go and watch James make a brat of himself?" Sirius asked, finally, attempting normalcy. Remus nodded again, still silent, and they both stepped back into the cold autumn air as they moved to sit on the spectators' benches, watching their classmates dart around the field. Sirius thought to himself, now or never. Remus, the other students were coming in for their final landing, and soon they would be surrounded by chattering, wind-flushed bodies. Yeah? You can't read, can you? Remus sighed, the way you might sigh after setting down a stack of heavy books. Nah, I won't tell anyone. Cheers. Sirius smiled, heart still kicking. It took a moment, but Remus smiled back.